My name is Lark Monroe. I am 33 years old, and according to the people sitting across from me in this courtroom, my mother, my brother, I don't exist. Not the version of me who held rank in the U.S. Army. Not the one who spent 14 years in shadows, deployed to places whose names will never make headlines. Not the one who came home with a scar across her ribs and a rank sewn into silence. They say I made it all up. I sit quietly in a black pantsuit. No medals, no insignia. Just my name on a docket and the weight of a lawsuit accusing me of fraud, impersonation, and emotional manipulation. My mother clutches her pearls like they might protect her from the truth. My brother, Graham, avoids eye contact. He always was better at betrayal when he didn't have to look you in the eye. The judge asks my lawyer if we're ready to respond. Elizabeth stands, calm as ever. Your Honor, we request a brief recess. Our key witness is en route. The judge raises an eyebrow. Then it happens. The rear doors open. Boots strike the floor. Measured. Unhurried. A man in a full Class A uniform steps through, silver stars on each shoulder catching the fluorescent lights. He walks straight toward me and stops. The air tightens. He brings his hand to his brow and salutes. Lieutenant General Monroe, he says, clear and sharp. Ma'am, it's good to see you again. My mother doesn't breathe. Graham shifts like the floor betrayed him. And me? I don't flinch. Because for the first time in years, someone said my name. And meant it. They didn't even tell me he died. I found out from a paid obituary in the Beaufort County Chronicle, crammed between a roofing ad and a notice about a tractor auction. It took me 3 full minutes to register the name on the page. Walter H. Monroe, Brigadier General, retired. My grandfather. The only man in that family who ever looked me in the eye and didn't ask why I wasn't more like my brother. The funeral had already happened. No call. No message. Not even a voicemail. They buried him without telling me, like I had never existed at all. I drove through the night. There was no destination at first, just the vague sense of a road I'd taken as a teenager, one that wound along the edge of the coast and led to a house that always smelled like salt and pipe smoke. I didn't even know if it was still standing. But when I reached the last turnoff and saw the white mailbox half swallowed by seagrass, I knew. I stopped the engine and sat in silence, headlights casting a weak glow on the wooden sign that read, Monroe Bluff. The house loomed above the water, paint peeling, porch sagging like an old man's back. But it was there, just like I remembered. I climbed the steps and knocked. Once. Then again. The door opened. She didn't gasp, didn't step back. My mother just stared, perfectly composed, like she'd been expecting me. Her hair was pulled tight into a bun, lipstick crimson. She wore a navy dress I'd seen in photos of charity luncheons and alumni fundraisers. You're early, she said. The hearing isn't until next Thursday. I didn't respond. My voice hadn't caught up to the cold in my chest. You didn't tell me he passed, I said. You were unreachable, she answered, turning her back to me. We didn't know how to contact you? I've had the same number for 12 years. Well, she poured herself a glass of water and didn't offer me one. That's not what your brother said. I stepped inside. The air was colder than outside. Sterile. The kind of stillness you find in staged homes, not real ones. The living room hadn't changed. Same antique armchairs, same stone fireplace. But the mantel, once filled with family photos, was now bare except for one large frame of Graham in his graduation robe. No sign of me. Not even the old picture of Grandpa and me at the Veterans Day parade, where he let me wear his second uniform cap and called me Lieutenant Trouble. He left the house to me, I said. She didn't turn around. Yes, she replied curtly. And that's why we're suing. There it was. No grief. No pretense. Just strategy. I stared at her back. So straight. So sure. You're not suing for the house, I said. You're suing to erase me. Legally. She faced me then. Her eyes were ice. We're doing this in court, she said. Because court is the only language you seem to understand now. Ranks. Orders. Silence. I nodded once. You're right, I said. You taught me silence. I walked out before she could answer. The porch groaned beneath my boots. The screen door slammed shut behind me, not from anger, just the wind. Back in the car. I stared at the house for a long while. Once. I believed it was a place I'd return to when the world grew too loud. But standing there, it was clear. This was never a home. It was a performance. And they were about to step onto the grandest stage they'd ever seen. A courtroom. Where I wouldn't need applause. Only truth. The envelope arrived 3 days later. No note. No letter. Just a legal summons. Thick with embossed seals and procedural language. Monroe v. Monroe. Filed in the state of South Carolina. Plaintiff. Graham E. Monroe. Co-signed by Sylvia K. Monroe. The allegations? Fraudulent representation of military identity. Fabricated service history. Coercion of an elderly family member for material gain. A cold knot formed behind my ribs. I had read false accusations before, in files, in intel reports, in intercepted communications from men who doctored records to sell lies to foreign regimes. But I never expected to see my own name on one. I forwarded the documents to Elizabeth Kwan, my attorney. She had defended men and women whose work would never appear on LinkedIn, who had operated in shadows long before I did. She read it once, closed the folder, and asked calmly, "Do you want to countersue?" I shook my head. "No," I said. "Let them think they're winning." She gave me one of her long, unreadable looks, the kind that says she's already filed 10 backup motions and subpoenaed every traffic cam within 5 miles of the Monroe property. "Then we go quiet," she said. "No press, no statements, but you'll need to testify." "I won't need to," I replied. "Someone else will." She didn't ask who. She already knew. The last time my mother saw me in person, I was 19. She thought I was leaving for college. She didn't ask which one, didn't hug me goodbye, just handed me a check for books and said, "Call if you get lost." I didn't call, and I didn't get lost. I vanished. I was recruited into a classified military program for linguistics and behavioral intelligence, one of those contracts buried so deep that even the paper trail has a clearance level. They wanted people who could speak in patterns, disappear into rooms, read silence better than sound. I passed every screen, cleared every test, and within 6 months, I no longer existed, at least not as Lark Monroe. I had a new name, a new ID, a life rewritten in code and static. My deployments never made headlines. There were no welcome home parades. I operated in the gray, places where wearing a uniform made you a target, and speaking the wrong dialect meant a knife between your ribs. I moved between embassies, black sites, and temporary command posts, most of them stripped of insignia and full of people who didn't have last names. There were years when I didn't sleep indoors. Years when I didn't speak English for weeks at a time. There were nights when I read bedtime stories over an encrypted headset to distract a child whose father had just been taken. Nights when I had to choose whether to call in a drone or let a compound go dark. Most nights, there were no good choices. I sent 2 postcards home in 14 years. One was blank. The other simply said, "Still here. L." I never got a response. My grandfather, Walter, was the only one who knew even part of the truth. He never pushed, never demanded details. Once, during a brief 72-hour leave, I showed up at his back porch just after midnight. He opened the screen door, handed me coffee, and said, "You're thinner." That was his way of saying he missed me. He asked no questions. I stayed for less than a day. Before I left, he pressed a small silver coin into my hand. It had his unit's insignia on it. "For when it gets quiet," he said. Too quiet. And then, I was gone again. I missed his last 3 birthdays. I didn't call on his 80th. I was sitting on a rooftop in northern Jordan, watching for signals that never came. My earpiece buzzed with static. My team was 2 minutes late to check in. I remember looking up at the stars and thinking, not about the mission, but about the honey jar he used to keep on the windowsill and how he'd dip bread into it for breakfast like it was a sacred ritual. He called me that week. I didn't answer. I couldn't. The line wasn't secure. His number wasn't in my whitelist. I still remember the voicemail, though, the way his voice trembled near the end. "I'm proud of you, Lark. Even if I never get to say it face to face again." He didn't. When the lawsuit came, something inside me snapped into stillness. Not anger, not sadness. Just a kind of hyperclarity that years in covert ops had taught me to trust. They weren't doing this because they believed I was a fraud. They were doing this because they needed me to disappear again. This time, officially. If they could erase my record, undo the inheritance, invalidate my presence in Grandpa's will, it would be like I'd never returned at all. Graham wanted the property. My mother wanted the narrative. I was just collateral. Elizabeth asked again, weeks later. "You sure you don't want to go public? We could leak your clearance, seal the court record, use the press." "No," I said. "That's not how this ends." "Then how does it end?" she asked. I looked her in the eye. "With a name," I said. "Spoken by the right person, in the right room." She nodded once. "Then we wait." I spent the weeks before the hearing alone in a rented cabin not far from Bluff County. No internet. No signal. Just paper files and a worn-down pair of trail boots. I read every line of the deposition Graham submitted. He said I faked photos, that I photoshopped myself into military ceremonies and briefings, that I wore a costume and told Grandpa stories convincing enough to manipulate a dying man into rewriting his will. He even claimed I used PTSD lingo to sound believable. I laughed out loud at that one, as if trauma had grammar. The night before the hearing, I slept 3 hours. I didn't rehearse a statement. Didn't prepare an alibi. I didn't need one. I wore the same black pantsuit from the deposition and tied my hair back in a plain knot. No rings, no makeup. Just the coin Grandpa gave me, tucked into my jacket pocket. Elizabeth met me outside the courthouse steps at 7:55 a.m. sharp. "You ready?" she asked. "As I'll ever be." We walked inside together, past the marble atrium where the state seal loomed overhead like a quiet warning. They were already waiting. My mother in charcoal gray, Graham in a navy suit too expensive for someone who hadn't worked in 3 years. They didn't look at me. They didn't have to. They thought the battle was already over. The courtroom smelled like lemon cleaner and paper. Everything else, dignity, honesty, family, had already been stripped out of it. The judge entered precisely at 9 a.m. He was older. Silver hair swept neatly back. Reputation for zero tolerance toward theatrics. That gave me hope. He adjusted his glasses, glanced at both tables, and asked for opening statements. Graham's attorney, a sharp-featured man named Whitaker, stood first. His voice was smooth, too smooth. "This case is not about money," he began, with the kind of false humility that always precedes something venomous. "It is about truth, about preserving the honor of a distinguished military legacy from being co-opted by someone who, though biologically related, has manufactured a past that does not exist." He paused just long enough to scan the room. "My client, Mr. Graham Monroe, respectfully submits that his sister, Ms. Lark Monroe, never served in the military. There is no record of enlistment, no graduation from a military academy, no visible paper trail of deployment. She claims to be a lieutenant general, but the Department of Defense has no public recognition of her as such. Your Honor, we are dealing with identity theft against the U.S. Army." He finished with a little half-smile, like he expected polite applause. The judge turned his gaze to our side. Elizabeth stood slowly. "We request a short recess," she said evenly. "Our key witness is arriving momentarily." Whitaker scoffed. "A witness to fiction?" The judge held up one hand, unimpressed by the drama. "You have 10 minutes." He struck the gavel once. The room stirred like a shaken snow globe. I didn't move. I didn't need to. The moment had already begun. 9 minutes passed. Then the back doors opened. No announcement, no guard. Just the sound. One set of boots. Deliberate. Paced. The kind of gait that makes every head turn even before the man appears. He entered with precision. Class A uniform. 4 silver stars gleaming beneath courtroom fluorescence. His chest bore ribbons I hadn't seen in years, campaigns I knew by name and consequence. He wasn't here to impress. He was here to end the pretending. I saw my mother tense in the front row. Graham shifted in his seat. The gallery went silent. He walked straight to me and saluted. "Lieutenant General Monroe," he said, voice carrying easily across the oak benches. "Ma'am, it's good to see you again." I stood, nodded. "General Kearney." He turned to the judge. "Sir, with your permission, I'd like to submit documentation." The judge, who had clearly recognized the uniform before the name, gestured forward with barely restrained curiosity. Kearney stepped to the bench and handed over a slim folder, sealed with the Department of Defense insignia. He spoke with clarity, no embellishment. Contained within are redacted service logs, confirmation of rank, operations under Special Command Authority, and declassified excerpts of General Monroe's service record. The word general hit the room like a dropped weight. He continued. "I served as her commanding officer for 6 years. During that time, she led high-value operations in 5 continents, including one that prevented the destabilization of a NATO-aligned government. Her promotion to lieutenant general was authorized following successful completion of Operation Black Strand. I personally oversaw the declassification request after she was named in this lawsuit." He turned, now facing the room. Not dramatic, just firm. "Everything about her service has been buried under layers of clearance to protect this country. Not to deceive, not to manipulate, but to serve." Then, quietly, his voice softened, not in volume, but in tone. "I've buried men with fewer stars than she earned, and she didn't inherit them. She bled for them." The judge didn't blink. He looked to the plaintiff's side, Would the plaintiff like to respond? My mother opened her mouth, but nothing came out. Whitaker leaned toward her, whispered something. Still nothing. Her lips moved like she'd swallowed the wrong name and couldn't cough it up. Graham sat rigid, face turned toward the floor. The judge gave it a few seconds, then nodded. Motion to dismiss all claims and expunge public record of fraud? Elizabeth stood. So moved. Granted, the judge said. All charges dismissed. Court is adjourned. One gavel strike. Sharp. Final. Outside. The light was soft. General Kearney stood beside me in silence. For a long time, neither of us spoke. You didn't have to come, I said finally. He looked down at me, not as a superior, but as a man who had seen enough damage to know when something needed witness. Yes, he said simply. I did. Because no one should have to prove they bled for people who never once asked if they were okay. He paused, then added something I've never forgotten. And because truth, when it walks in the room, should never walk alone. He didn't wait for thanks, just turned and walked back to his car. I stood there, the courthouse steps beneath me, the weight of something unspoken sliding off my shoulders like a second skin I'd forgotten I was wearing. I wasn't vindicated. I wasn't victorious. I was free. And for the first time in years, that was enough. I didn't go back to the Monroe house. There was nothing there for me. Not after the courtroom, not after the salute, not after watching my mother's face collapse in on itself like a cathedral losing its last stained glass window. I had been erased so thoroughly from her version of reality that I wasn't sure she even knew how to say my name anymore. Instead, I drove south along the old coastal highway, past flat marshland and crumbling boat docks, until the signal on my phone finally cut out and the road narrowed into gravel. The gate was still there, rusted, leaning to one side, with the initials W, H, M, carved into the iron plate. My grandfather had welded it himself when I was a child. I remember him letting me hold the chalk line while he worked, my fingers curled tight around a piece of dusty white string. The house beyond it wasn't much. A low stone structure with timber beams and an old tin roof, set against a backdrop of pine and sky. He called it the watch post. Said it was the only place in the world where he could hear himself think. When I stepped out of the car, the wind caught the hem of my coat and tossed sand against my boots. I stood there for a long moment, breathing in the air, salt, bark, dry leaves, memory. Then I walked to the porch. The front door creaked open like it remembered me. Inside, the air was dry and still. A layer of dust covered everything except the path where my grandfather used to walk. From the entry to the back window, where the light hit the old oak desk just right at 4 p.m. The furniture was covered in canvas sheets, pale ghosts draped in silence. In the back room, the fireplace was empty, but above it still hung a faded map, Europe and the Middle East, with pinholes marking old battles and handwritten dates in Grandpa's angular script. His service medals were gone, probably moved to the main house for display, but a single photo remained tucked behind the clock on the mantel. I pulled it out. It was me, 10 years old, arms crossed, standing beside him at a Veterans Day parade, wearing a jacket far too big and a cap that kept sliding over my ears. I looked determined, and small, and proud in a way that only a child can be when someone believes in her without needing proof. I had forgotten that picture existed. Holding it now, I remembered everything, the heat of his palm on my shoulder, the crowd's murmur, the way he'd whispered, "They'll never see you the way I do, Lark." But that's never a reason to become smaller. I set the photo upright again, brushing dust from the frame with my sleeve. Then I sat down. Not to cry, not to collapse, but to be still. Stillness, I'd learned, is a kind of strength most people mistake for absence. I stayed at the watch post for 2 weeks. No TV, no cell service, just bird song, old pine needles, and the rhythmic cracking of the wood as it settled into night. Somewhere in that quiet, I began to remember how to breathe without bracing for impact. That was when the idea came. Not revenge, not justice, just purpose. There were others like me, people who had served under aliases, whose medals came in sealed boxes with no ceremonies. People whose stories were too complicated for newsletters and too dangerous for open records. People who never got to say, "Yes, I was there," because the world only valued what it could verify. I couldn't give them recognition, but maybe I could give them stillness. I reached out to a nonprofit I'd worked with briefly during my last deployment, a group that specialized in transitional housing for veterans with high-clearance trauma records. No press, no applications, just referrals through secure channels. They knew who I was. They didn't ask why I disappeared. When I told them I wanted to restore the watch post as a private retreat for invisible vets, they didn't hesitate. A small team came down from Raleigh. Builders, volunteers. A few quiet souls who didn't speak much, but whose boots told stories all their own. We tore up the old floorboards, replaced the insulation, rewired the solar grid. We added 3 bedrooms, a small therapy library, and a kitchen that opened onto the back porch. There were no plaques, no logos, just a wooden sign above the door that said, "For those who served in silence." The first guest arrived in April. He didn't give a name, just initials. He left behind a single note on the table when he left. "First time I've slept through the night in 8 years. Thank you." More followed. Some stayed a night. Others stayed months. No questions asked. I became the quiet keeper. I brewed coffee. I fixed plumbing. I nodded when someone sat beside me and didn't say a word for hours. It wasn't therapy. It was space. And in a world that asked so much from those who disappeared for it, space was a revolution. 6 months passed before I heard from Graham. Not a call, just a letter. Thin envelope. No return address. Inside, Lark. We didn't know. We thought we were protecting something that was already gone. "I'm sorry. Gee." I folded it twice. Then again. I didn't tear it. Didn't write back. Some truths don't need replies. They just need to land. The watch post wasn't meant to be a statement. It wasn't built to impress donors or appear in glossy veteran newsletters. It didn't host ribbon cuttings or press tours. That was the point. No one had to prove anything to walk through that door. I didn't advertise it. I didn't fundraise. I didn't even give it a formal name beyond what Grandpa had scrawled into the old porch beam decades ago. But word spread, quietly, through the networks that exist just beneath the visible world. Someone knew someone who'd served with someone who once knew me. That was enough. Once a month. I hosted a gathering. Nothing structured. No speeches. Just shared coffee, a small fire, and a porch with wide steps overlooking the pines. Sometimes people talked. Mostly they didn't. But even silence has a language. One evening in early fall, a woman showed up just before sunset. Young, mid-20s at most, but with eyes that had already seen the end of the world more than once. She introduced herself only as Riley. Her hands stayed clenched the entire first night. Not in fear, in habit, like she was holding on to something that had already slipped through. She didn't speak until the second morning, when I found her sitting at the kitchen counter, watching steam rise from a chipped mug. "Is it true?" she asked. I didn't look up. "What? That you used to be someone else?" I considered the question, then answered with another. "Don't we all?" She laughed once. Dry, like her lungs hadn't done that in years. Riley stayed for 3 weeks. The second weekend, she helped me rebuild the front railing. The third, she read aloud from an old paperback someone left behind. Pages dog-eared by hands long gone. On her last morning, she stood by the front door with her backpack slung over one shoulder and said, "You never asked what happened to me." I nodded. "You never asked who I was either," she added. "You'll tell me when you're ready," I said. She looked down at her boots. "I don't think I will." "That's fine." She hesitated, then looked up. "You're not what I expected." I gave a half smile. "Good." Then she was gone. She left a small patch on the windowsill, a fabric insignia torn from a uniform no one had claimed. It stayed there. Over time, the watchpost grew, not in size, but in rhythm. I learned how to move quietly around people who needed space. Learn that trauma doesn't shout, it settles, like dust on glass, waiting for the light to find it. We started getting visitors from farther out, North Dakota, Arizona, New Hampshire. Some drove straight through the night. Others flew as close as they could, then hitchhiked the rest. One man walked. They brought with them old nightmares, fresh grief, medals in Ziploc bags. Silence wound tight around their throats. I didn't fix them. I didn't try. I just gave them a place where no one asked for proof. And something changed in me too. The woman who once trained to disappear had become someone others sought out in order to be seen. Not saluted, not applauded, just seen. I still wore the rank. I still answered if Washington called, but the uniform stayed in a sealed trunk, and the titles stayed outside the porch steps. Out here, we were just names, or letters, or, sometimes, just a nod in the dark. One afternoon, as the first frost began to settle in the trees, a girl barely out of her teens arrived with her mother. She had short hair, scabbed knuckles, and wore a hoodie 3 sizes too big. Her mother stayed in the car. The girl walked to the porch, looked at me, then blurted, "Are you really a general?" I looked at her. At the question sitting behind her question. "I used to be invisible," I said. She stared, confused. "Is that a yes?" I stepped aside and gestured toward the front door. "It's warm inside." That night, she didn't speak once. The next morning, she asked if we had any books about astronomy. Some visitors returned, others didn't. Some left notes. Others vanished like fog. Once, I found a pair of dog tags nailed quietly to the pine tree out back. No name, no initials. Just a piece of cloth wrapped around the chain that read, "Enough." I left it there. One morning, just before the anniversary of the lawsuit, I walked to the back edge of the property, the place where Grandpa used to sit in an old rocking chair and sip coffee in the dark. I brought his chair back from storage, cleaned the wood, tightened the joints, and set it down facing east. Then I sat. I don't know how long I was there before the wind changed. Someone behind me cleared their throat. I turned. My mother stood at the tree line, not dressed for the woods, not holding a bag, just standing there like someone who had finally followed a map she didn't trust. She didn't come closer. I didn't wave her in. We stared at each other for what could have been 10 seconds or 10 minutes. Then she turned and left. That was the last time I saw her. She didn't say a word, but that, I suppose, had always been the most familiar language between us. That night, after she left the tree line, I sat on the porch and watched the sky fade to that dark blue that always feels colder than black. I didn't move for a long time. I didn't feel anything. No rage, no relief, not even sadness. Just the quiet awareness that something had ended, or maybe never really started. She came all that way not to speak, not to explain, not to apologize. And somehow, that made sense. Our whole relationship had been a long series of silences, punctuated by control and correction. She had always spoken like a woman who'd already decided what version of you was acceptable. The rest? She edited out of existence. And now? She still couldn't say my name. Still couldn't admit that maybe she'd spent a lifetime loving the child she imagined, not the one she had. I never wrote her back. Never sent a letter. But if I had, it would have read something like this. You erased me from your home, from your family, from your photos. You thought if I disappeared long enough, I'd either come back the way you wanted or not come back at all. When I chose a life you didn't understand, a life too quiet, too gray, too outside your vision of legacy, you told yourself it was shame, that I was ashamed of you, of where I came from. But I wasn't. I was just trying to protect something you never saw, that some of us serve without medals. Some of us serve in ways the world isn't meant to see, and some of us come back with stories that can't be told over dinner. I didn't vanish to spite you. I vanished because it was the only way to stay whole. You may never understand what I became, but you will never again pretend I was nothing. I burned that letter in the fireplace the next morning. There was no need to send it. She wouldn't read it. And truthfully, I didn't write it for her. I wrote it for myself, so I could let go of the part of me still hoping one day she'd call and say the one word she never used when she looked at me. Daughter. That same week, I received a parcel. No return address. Just a postmark from Northern Virginia. Inside was a photograph. Old, black and white. Clearly a copy of a copy. It showed a group of soldiers in desert fatigues, standing in front of a downed aircraft. Dust everywhere. Eyes squinting. One of them, face half-shadowed, arms crossed, was me. Taped to the back was a note. They tried to erase you, but we remember. No signature, no name, just that. I kept the photo, tucked it into the bottom drawer of the desk Grandpa used to write his mission journals on, and for the first time in years, I slept with the windows open. A month later, Riley returned. She didn't announce it, just showed up one afternoon while I was pulling weeds near the front walkway. She dropped her duffel next to me and said, "Need another pair of hands?" I looked up. She was smiling, but this time, it reached her eyes. "You're early," I said. She shrugged. Didn't feel like waiting. We worked in silence for a while, hands in the soil, the kind of shared labor that doesn't require conversation. When we took a break, she handed me a folder. Inside were plans, real ones. A design for an additional cabin near the back tree line, minimalist, functional, private. For women like us, she said. Ones who never had a room that didn't come with conditions. I stared at the drawing for a long time, then nodded. Let's build it. She exhaled, and for the first time, I saw what it looked like when someone stopped holding their breath around you. We built the new cabin in 7 weeks. No contractors, no crew, just Riley. A few friends she trusted from her last posting. And me. Learning how to pour foundation and cut trim like we were writing our names in the wood. Each nail felt like punctuation. Each wall like reclamation. We didn't speak about what the space was for. We just built it. And when it was done, we left it unfurnished except for one thing: a bench under the window, where the afternoon light landed just right. A place to sit and think. Or not think. To exist without having to explain why you were there? Riley carved a word into the windowsill with the edge of a flathead screwdriver. Enough. No flourish. No framing. Just the truth. The cabin never had a formal name, but people started calling it the quiet room. It became the place someone went when the noise got too loud again, even out here. When you needed to sit with the version of yourself no one else could carry. The version that didn't sleep. The version that flinched at kindness. No one stayed long. Sometimes just a night. Sometimes a weekend. But they always came out lighter. Not healed. Just less alone. On the anniversary of my grandfather's passing, I found myself standing beside the old cedar he used to tie wind chimes to. I'd almost forgotten how the sound carried across the bluff. Gentle and strange, like laughter echoing in a chapel. I hung a small set of chimes there that morning. Not store-bought. Handmade. Welded from spare brass and salvaged copper. When the breeze caught it, I closed my eyes. And for a second, I heard his voice again. Not the words, just the weight behind them. The way he used to say my name like it belonged in his mouth. Like it never needed permission to take up space. 6 months after that, Riley took over managing the watch post. It wasn't a formal handoff. Just the natural shift of someone stepping into something they were always meant to carry. I stayed nearby, but I no longer needed to keep watch. She added a second cabin, started a journal library, planted lavender near the side path where the wind always moved through the pines. And me? I wrote. Not a book, not a memoir, just notes, reflections, fragments of conversations, stories that weren't mine to publish but too sacred to forget. Sometimes I'd leave one in the quiet room, no signature, no explanation, just memory, offered without demand. The watch post never made headlines. There was no plaque, no social media presence. But every time someone came here after disappearing for too long, after being dismissed or doubted or erased, every time they stepped onto the porch and realized no one was waiting to interrogate their silence, that was legacy. Not the kind you fight over in a courtroom, the kind you live. The kind that doesn't need anyone's approval to be real. He didn't write this time. He showed up. It was early spring when I saw his car crunch up the gravel path, too polished for the dirt road, too careful in how it parked, straightened twice before the engine cut. He stepped out wearing the same navy coat he wore in court, though the sharpness had faded. His shoulders sloped now. His hair had grayed at the temples. I didn't move from the porch. He didn't ask if he could come closer. He just stood near the car, holding something flat in a brown envelope like it might break if he spoke too loud. I didn't come to undo anything, he said, eyes not quite meeting mine. I didn't reply. He walked halfway up the path, stopped at the base of the steps, and set the envelope on the bottom stair. Someone found this going through Grandpa's lockbox, the one in the wall. It was tucked behind a panel. Still, I said nothing. I shouldn't have believed her, he said after a beat. About you. About everything. Now he did look at me, briefly, like he needed to prove to himself that I was still real. But you disappeared, he added, more quietly. And when people disappear, it's easier to let them stay gone than admit you didn't look hard enough. The wind caught his last word and pulled it apart. I waited a long time, then said, "You filed the suit." His jaw tensed. "I know. That's not something you do by accident." He nodded. "No excuses. No justifications, just the hollow truth sitting between us. Then he stepped back. "I'll go." I watched him walk away. Not angry, not forgiven, just ended. The car pulled out slowly, its tires kicking up a trail of dust that didn't settle right away. I stared at the envelope on the step for a long time before picking it up. Inside was a letter. It wasn't addressed to anyone. No greeting, no signature. Just my grandfather's handwriting, unmistakable in its sharp, straight lines. If this was found after my passing, it means someone chose silence over truth. If Lark reads this, then she's come back. And if she hasn't, let her go. Not because she was wrong, but because we failed to protect the kind of service that doesn't show up in parades. This land is hers, not for what she told me, but for what she never needed to. I trust her judgment more than I ever trusted the system. If anyone questions that, they've already told you who they are. I folded the page slowly. It wasn't closure. It was clarity. And clarity is what people like Graham have the hardest time sitting with, because it doesn't come with applause or an easy fix. It just sits there, quiet and undeniable, like me, like truth, like the weight of silence finally breaking into sound. She arrived after sundown, in a pickup so rusted the tailgate barely held. The headlights stayed on too long after the engine cut, like she wasn't ready to be seen just yet. When she finally stepped out, I thought she was younger than she probably was. Short hair unevenly chopped, sweatshirt sleeves hiding her hands, boots far too big. She didn't introduce herself. Just stood at the porch edge, eyes on the door behind me like maybe she'd rehearsed this moment and suddenly forgot the lines. I kept my voice low. "You here for the room?" She nodded. Once. Sharp. Like anything more might betray her. I opened the screen door and held it without speaking. She walked in without looking back. The next morning, she sat on the porch swing, both hands wrapped around a chipped mug I didn't remember handing her. The fog hadn't lifted yet, and the air clung to the pine needles like memory. I sat across from her, sipping my own coffee in silence. After a while, she spoke. "They said I made it up." I didn't respond. Said I was never on the roster, that my deployment was administrative error. Even when my CO vouched for me, they said the paperwork didn't justify the rank, so they stripped it. I looked at her then, not her face, her posture. That precise stillness you can't fake unless you've been broken in the same way twice. They gave it to a man 2 years younger, same unit, less time. She paused. "His dad's a colonel." I nodded. She looked away, jaw clenched. "I don't need it back. I just needed to know I wasn't crazy." "You're not," I said quietly. She finally looked up. There was no tear, no collapse, just exhaustion so deep it made her hands tremble. I leaned forward slightly. "We have a room out back," I said. "Windows face the ridge, quietest part of the property." Her voice cracked, but her words didn't. "Do I have to sign anything?" I shook my head. "Just breathe." The girl, she never told us her name, stayed for 4 nights. She didn't speak much after that first morning, spent most of her time walking the edge of the ridge, where the pines thinned and the wind came through like a warning no one else could hear. She slept in the quiet room. Riley checked on her once or twice, left food by the door, never pushed. On the 3rd night, I woke up without knowing why. The kind of alertness you don't question, just obey. I grabbed a flashlight and stepped outside. The air was sharp, sky moonless, the kind of dark that presses in on the bones. I followed the crunch of soft gravel until I saw her, curled up on the porch swing, arms around her knees, still wearing the same oversized hoodie. I sat on the step below her, waited. After a long silence, she spoke. I used to pull night watch in Kandahar, 6 months straight. Couldn't sleep through silence after that. I didn't move. They assigned me to records after filing death reports for soldiers I used to drink with. Told me my deployment capacity was exhausted. A pause. I was 23. She let her words hang. I let them stay. Then she whispered something I almost didn't hear. I filed my own paperwork. I turned, slowly. I wanted to see what it would look like. My name, typed under the heading. Just once. It looked wrong. I didn't ask what happened next. I didn't have to. She said, "They accused me of falsifying access. Said I must have hacked the system. The same system I'd been trained to use." I looked up at the porch roof. The old wind chime rattled gently, out of rhythm. They never proved anything, but they didn't have to. Her voice dropped lower. They told my parents I was unstable, suggested professional separation. I lost my housing, my clearance, my benefits. The only thing I kept was the file. I turned to face her fully now. "You still have it?" She nodded, then pulled a folded packet from the front pocket of her hoodie. Creased, weathered, edges softened from too much handling. I reached up, gently took it. The pages inside weren't neat. They were printed over months, some redacted, some hand-scanned, pieced together like a record someone wanted to forget. I recognized some of the internal stamps, ones we used in gray ops, quiet blackouts, clerical obfuscation. Status classification meant to bury stories just deep enough that no one could find them, except the person they hurt. "You kept this all this time?" I asked. She looked away. "It's the only version of me that didn't get rewritten." We sat there a while, the file between us, the night still. Then I stood. "Come with me." She hesitated. "Why?" "There's someone I need you to meet." I didn't take her far. Just down the hill, past the tool shed, to the small detached building Riley and I had converted months before. Inside, dim track lights hummed quietly overhead. Shelves lined the walls, plain manila folders stacked neatly, some marked with initials, others with nothing at all. It was our shadow archive. Testimonies, files, records brought to us by others who'd been erased, discredited, or lost in the cracks. Not for public defense, not for legal fights, just to exist somewhere, together. Proof that they had been here, that their service, their selves, weren't fiction. I handed her a blank label and a pen. She stared at it. "What do I write?" I stepped back. "Whatever name still feels like yours." Her hand shook slightly as she wrote. Then she slipped her file into an open slot on the bottom shelf. No ceremony. No applause. Just the quiet thud of truth settling into place. It started with a phone call. I almost didn't answer. The number was blocked, which usually meant either government or mistake. But something in my gut said, "Pick up." Old instinct. The kind you don't unlearn even after leaving the field. "Lieutenant General Monroe?" the voice asked. I hadn't heard that rank out loud in over a year. "This is Colonel David Wren. I'm calling on behalf of the Department's Civilian Oversight Subcommittee." I stayed silent. He continued. "We're convening a closed evidentiary review. There's a case we believe you may be able to shed light on. Former Specialist C.J. Tennyson, charged with impersonation of service and unauthorized possession of restricted intel." The name meant nothing to me, until it did. Tennyson. He'd come through watch posts the previous winter, quiet, kind, spoke Spanish with a Colombian lilt. Spent most of his time planting trees along the ridge. We never asked what he'd done, only whether he needed space. Now they wanted to try him as a criminal, and they wanted me to speak. 2 weeks later, I walked back into a courtroom, but this time, it wasn't my name on the docket. It was his. The hearing was administrative, held in a federal building with no cameras, no press, just a judge, 2 military attorneys, 1 observer from the Office of Special Programs, and me. Tennyson sat at the end of the table. No rank, no uniform, just a thin man in a borrowed suit. Fingers folded so tightly they turned white at the knuckles. The prosecution laid out their case with professional distance. Forged deployment documents, fabricated citations, unauthorized contact with protected archives. Then came my turn. I stood slowly, placed a slim folder on the table. Inside were 3 things: a signed letter from a former commanding officer whose name wasn't on public record, a set of GPS logs from a base camp that never officially existed, and a photograph of Tennyson, years younger, sitting beside a forward operating translator team, marked Omega 12. The room didn't breathe for a long time. Then I spoke. Specialist Tennyson was embedded in a linguistics forward program initiated under JSOS in 2014. His assignment was classified. His operations weren't acknowledged because the unit itself didn't officially exist. I turned toward the panel. I know that because I helped design the unit. The attorneys shifted. The judge adjusted his glasses. I continued, calm and measured. The documents he's accused of fabricating were backdated and redacted under layered authorization. What you read as manipulation was the result of a program that taught its people to disappear so thoroughly. Even the system forgot where it put them. I paused, until it came time to punish them. They asked a few more questions, legal ones, cold ones. But the room had changed. The tone, the balance of weight. And when the judge called recess, I stepped outside and found Tennyson in the hallway, pacing. He looked up when he saw me. I didn't ask them to call you. I know. I thought it'd be easier if I just took the hit. I looked him in the eye. Easier for who? He didn't answer. I placed a hand on his shoulder. They erased you. Not because you lied, but because you told the truth in a language they couldn't read. He swallowed hard. You think they'll drop it? No, I said. I think they'll bury it quietly, which is what they always do when the system embarrasses itself. He laughed. Barely, like the sound had rusted from disuse. But you'll walk out of here intact, I added. And that's more than most get. Later that month, a new envelope arrived at the watch post. Inside was a folded piece of cardstock. No return address, just 1 line in small handwriting. It's not about being seen, it's about being remembered, even by one. I didn't need a name to know who it was from. I pinned it beside the others on the quiet room wall. No frame, no decoration. Just memory, stitched into wood, one truth at a time. The first time I climbed the ridge behind the watch post, I was 16. Grandpa brought me up there at dawn, still wrapped in a quilt, teeth chattering, muttering that this better be worth it. He didn't say a word the whole hike, just walked, slow and steady, boots crunching pine needles, until we reached the clearing where the wind never stopped moving. This, he said, resting a hand on my shoulder, is where the truth sounds different. I hadn't understood then. I did now. Years later, after all the hearings, after Graham, after the girl with no rank, after Tennyson. I stood there again, boots planted on the packed dirt, coat zipped to the throat, breath curling into the air like smoke. I wasn't alone this time. Behind me, Riley stood with her arms crossed, eyes closed, listening, farther back. A few others from the watch post, old names, new ones, some who'd never spoken to each other before, some who had no words left. No one said a thing. We didn't need to. A week earlier, someone had nailed a strip of aluminum to one of the ridge poles, etched with a single sentence. Service isn't a shape, it's a shadow. Riley found it. I didn't ask who wrote it. We decided to leave it there, let the wind read it for us. The watch post had no flagpole. That was intentional. No hierarchy. No pageantry. No rituals imported from the parts of service that left bruises under medals. But up here, on the ridge, someone had tied a length of fabric between two trees, a muted gray cloth, weather-beaten, with no emblem, no stars. It moved like breath. I stared at it for a long while that morning, thinking how some truths don't rise like banners. They settle, they wait, they hold. Like the ridge, like the wind, like the people who keep showing up. Not to speak, but to stand. I didn't make a speech. No passing of torches, no ceremony, just a slow walk down to the main cabin, one set of keys in my hand, and Riley waiting by the porch, her boots already muddy from rerouting the solar line we'd buried last fall. She looked at me, not like she was expecting anything, but like she already knew what came next. I held the keys out. She didn't take them right away. "You sure?" she asked, eyes narrowed like she could see into all the places I hadn't let anyone look. I nodded. "It's always been yours. I just cleared the path." She took the keys, not like someone accepting a gift, like someone taking responsibility for something fragile and unfinished. For the next few days, I stayed on the edge of things, moved out of the main room into a storage loft we'd barely used. I didn't leave completely, just loosened my grip, and watched her. She didn't change anything right away, didn't paint the walls or reorganize the shelves, but the rhythm shifted. A little more music in the mornings. She started planting herbs outside the kitchen, bringing back long conversations on the porch. Slow, spiraling ones that didn't end in answers but in understanding. The watchpost wasn't quieter, it was warmer. I liked that. One night, a young man came through, barely 20, too thin, too polite, calling everyone sir and ma'am like his identity depended on the discipline. Riley sat with him in the quiet room while I watched from the far window. I didn't need to hear the words. I could read it in the posture, the way he untied the tension from his shoulders, one admission at a time. When he walked out an hour later, he didn't look changed, but he wasn't folding inward anymore. That was enough. A week later, Riley found me on the ridge. "Thinking of going?" she asked. I smiled. "Thinking of staying somewhere else?" She nodded slowly. "You know you're always welcome here." "I know." "Then why does it feel like goodbye?" I looked out at the trees, where the wind kept moving, restless and sure. "Because it is," I said. Not to the people, just to the version of me who needed to stay. Before I left, I wrote one last entry in the watchpost's logbook, not for record-keeping, not for legacy, just for her. You don't have to be louder than the world to matter. You just have to last longer than the silence they tried to bury you under. I left before dawn. Didn't pack much. Didn't tell everyone. Just walked out past the ridge, past the split path near the creek, and took the long route back into town. not to disappear, but to begin again. Without defense, without proof, without the weight of needing to be visible to be real. Conclusion. I live in a small cottage now, tucked beneath a line of red maples that turn gold every fall. The town is quiet. Just a post office, 2 churches, and a diner that only serves breakfast after 11 if they like you. Most days. No one knows who I am, and I like it that way. There's no salute here, no protocol, no history to outrun. Just the sound of boots on dry leaves and the soft creak of wood as the porch settles into its own kind of silence. Sometimes I'm asked what I used to do. I usually say I worked in federal logistics and leave it there. If they press, I smile and change the subject. No one's ever rude about it. People here know what not to ask when someone's eyes go still. I still wake at 4:30. Some habits don't break. They just soften. I make coffee. I read. I walk the ridge trail if the air's clear. I write notes I'll never send. To people I used to know. Versions of myself I outgrew. Ghosts who still deserve a name. I don't need to be remembered loudly anymore. But I refuse to be forgotten falsely. Twice a year, I return to the watch post. Riley runs it now with a quiet authority that doesn't require a raised voice. She added a greenhouse, started a seed library, and built a bench out by the southern bluff where visitors can leave pieces of their past without explanation. Last spring, someone left their dog tags tied to a poem printed on wax paper. No name, no initials, just a line that read, "I didn't come here to be saved. I came here to rest." That's what the watch post is now. A place for those who no longer want to fight for recognition but still want to feel real. A space where silence isn't punishment. It's proof you've earned your own quiet. One day, Riley handed me a folder. It wasn't heavy, but it felt like a door. Inside were testimonies from guests, anonymous pages of memories, regrets, relief. Some had written down things they hadn't spoken aloud in years. Others had left nothing but drawings, song lyrics, coordinates. There was one short note that stayed with me. It read, "Your story helped me believe mine wasn't fiction. I never found out who wrote it, but I pinned it beside my desk, just above the old coin Grandpa once gave me, the one I carried in my jacket across 5 continents. Through missions I still can't speak of. It's tarnished now, but it still balances perfectly in the center of my palm. I sometimes wonder what became of the ones who erased me. My mother, Graham, the family that chose convenience over conviction. I don't hate them. I don't miss them either. They chose what they chose, and I chose to outlive it. To rebuild something not for revenge, but for record, for memory, for those who didn't get the benefit of a courtroom or a 4-star witness, or even someone to say, "I believe you." I built the watch post for them, but I kept going. For me. There's a girl who visits sometimes, mid-20s, never shares much, sits by the fireplace and carves patterns into pine with the tip of her boot. She reminds me of myself. One morning she asked, "How do you live with being erased?" I didn't answer right away. Then I said, "You don't. You write over it." She looked confused. With what? With what they couldn't see. She never asked again. On my desk now, there's a photo. It's not the courtroom, not the watch post, not even my last day in uniform. It's a moment from long ago. Veterans Day. Age 10. I'm in Grandpa's old jacket. Sleeves too long, eyes too wide. He's kneeling beside me, one hand on my shoulder. He's not smiling. He's watching. And in his face, I see the only recognition I ever needed. They tried to erase me, but erasure only works on what's silent. And I am not silent anymore. I am not hidden. I am not gone. I am not your version of the truth. I am my own. And I lasted. That's the part they'll never take back.